my name's Leah and I am going to talk to you today about using some Amy Howard products, specifically milk paint and milk paint binder, how to finish and seal a milk paint piece. Milk paint's one of my absolute favorite products I'm most comfortable with, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Today we're going to work on another bench. This one is a Rococo style vintage bench, love seat, and currently the finish on it, if you want to take a look, it's a little crusty. I'll get you closer as we start to work on it, but I really don't want that as my undercoat. And for milk paint, you need a base because milk paint needs something to adhere to. So your choices, you could do a gel stain, which is Amy's gel stains, which are great and they come in different variety of wood colors. You can use the one-step paint as your base coat, or you can use milk paint with the Toscana milk paint binder as your base. So today I'm actually going to teach you how to use the binder. I feel like it's really not used enough or talked about. You cannot put milk paint on top of an existing stain or just directly on top of wood. You need something for that milk paint to really adhere to. So my advice is you can create your own custom milk paint with the milk paint binder. You can use your gel stain or you can use your one step, but there's no other way. So today I'm going to do I'm going to create my own color. So Rococo furniture was primarily either mahogany, rosewood, or walnut. And because our colors can't get as dark as we'd like them to be, I'm going to go closer to a rosewood color today. But before we get started, I'm going to talk about what we're going to need for this project so you can have all your supplies ready to go as you paint along with me. So first you want to go ahead and clean your piece with the clean slate. Remember, prep is the most important part next to painting. Maybe it's more important than painting, because if you don't have your prep right, then your paint's not going to adhere correctly and your finish isn't going to look right, or something drastic could happen. So always prep, clean your piece first. We're going to need colors today that I'm going to do. Oh, and I'm going to teach you some gesso. I love gesso, and I feel like any chance I can use it, I'm going to use it. So we're going to use gesso. Sorry. We'll need milk paint binder for the base. For our base colors, since I'm making a custom rose woody color, I don't want it to look antique pine. Antique pine is more Gustavian. This is a Rococo, so we're going to try to go more of a brownish, pinkish hue rosewoody. So we're going to use Venetian brown. I am going to use a little bit of Toulouse rose and champagne yellow. You don't need these colors specifically, but this is what I'm just trying to do. And I'm going to use a little bit of the Venetian brown pigment powder to darken it up just a tad. As far as the colors that I'm going to meld together, I need Scandinavian gray. We're going to use Central Park, one of my favorite blues right now. So pretty. And some Scandinavian white. We're going to play with those mix ratios because we're going to do a 3-layer. We'll need antiquing glaze. We're going to need a seawall sponge. Of course, that cracked gesso, light wax, dark wax. And if we have time, I hope, do a little bit of gilding. I know I promised I would do some with you guys. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to mix our base coat milk paint. We're going to use Venetian brown, 1 part Venetian brown, and 1 part champagne yellow. Now we're going to mix these in the dry form. It's the best way to mix milk paint, and that way the colors really get mixed in well. I'm also going to add some Venetian brown pigment powder. I'd like to darken the brown a little bit as it is a little light. My goal here is to achieve a rosewood color. If I was looking for an antique pine, it'd be a deeper yellow mixing in. So it's more of a faint yellow with that Venetian brown. I do like the pigment powder. It does darken the brown a little bit more. I'm also going to add Toulouse to the mix, as Toulouse has a hint of pink in it. I do add a little bit of praying wife as well, just a touch. It helps deepen the yellow in the color without making it too yellow. We're also going to mix in our water. When you're mixing the milk paint, it's 1:1. So 1 part milk paint, 1 part water. Really mix that thoroughly through. Then you're going to add your Toscana Milk Paint binder. You want to make sure you really shake it up before adding it to your paint. The Toscana Milk Paint binder and the Toscana Milk Paint, the ratio there is 2:1. So 2 parts milk paint to 1 part binder. Now I've accidentally have added too much milk paint binder, and it's not a bad thing, but it really will make your milk paint base very thick, very sticky. Don't get it on your floor. You want to get it off the floor immediately. So now we're going to go making our milk paint layers. First, we're going to start with Strasbourg white and the hint of Central Park. My ratio for this mix will be 4:1. 4 parts Strasbourg white to 1 part Central Park. Now, we're making 3 layers. This is going to be the layer after that milk paint binder. I want that second layer to be darker and that third last layer to be a combination of the first and the second layer. So here we are, we're mixing in our milk paints in dry form. You can adjust as you feel, as you like, but make sure you write that down in your notes. Always write down all your recipes, all your ratios for all your layers. It will come in handy if you have to replicate or if you have to make more paint in the end. I also make all my paints in a Tupperware container. That way I can put a lid on it and put it in the fridge. Milk paint has a shelf life of 2 weeks when it's refrigerated. So definitely doing that. So here I'm mixing in 1:1 milk paint and my water. Now I'm hand mixing it. There are a couple of different options. You can do it a hand blender or you can mix it by hand. I find that when I'm making larger quantities, I like to use a hand blender. But something like this, really simple to use a spoon, slowly adding water, and that's the best. So our second layer here is Scandinavian white, Central Park, and I know I said we wanted to do Scandinavian gray, but I changed my mind and we're going to do Noir instead. That second layer, I really want it to pop. So when we start pulling away with our antiquing glaze, that color really shines through. So I went a little bit deeper, and it's not drastic, but a little bit darker. So our ratio is 2 parts Scandinavian white, 4 parts Central Park, 1 part Noir. And that's really going to help accent that blue, make it a really pretty blue-gray. But when we're using Noir, it really helps that it makes it less looking gray than if we had used a Scandinavian gray. So here I am, we're mixing it up. Make sure that's really stirred up well. As you start to paint with it, you want to continue to agitate that paint because the pigment tends to want to settle at the bottom. It's a great color. Our third layer is Strasbourg white, Central Park, and Noir. Our ratios are 6:1 and a hint of Noir, just a tiny bit. So obviously that last layer is going to be more white with just a tiny bit of blue added in here. and a little bit of black, that Noir, to just kind of blend all those colors really effortlessly. Again, mixing in dry form. And then we'll mix it with water in that 1-to-1 ratio. Here we're going to start working on our cracked gesso. I had made some previously the night before, so you could see what the consistency should look like. Cracked gesso, again, just like milk paint, can last for 2 weeks in the fridge. What I'm talking about here is if you make your gesso thicker, it's easier for those vertical surfaces. Sometimes it feels like it's impossible to lay a piece down on its side, so working with a little bit thicker gesso will help from preventing it from running. But remember, the thicker the gesso, the bigger the crack. So, and it has a consistency of pancake batter. So I'm going to make a second batch here that's going to be a little bit thicker. So for those of you who are working on those vertical surfaces, know what it's going to look like. It's going to almost feel like a sour cream consistency. So all of these materials that we're working with are food grade. They're safe to be around your kids and your family. We have to keep in mind they are milk. So we're going to go ahead and start our actual piece. We're going to put on our milk binder base with the milk paint binder base. And we're going to use a chip brush. Now make sure you go ahead and agitate the paint prior to painting onto your piece to make sure everything is thoroughly mixed. And nice even strokes. You want to be mindful of runs. If you start seeing the paint run, go ahead and try to whisk that away with the brush. Drips with the milk paint binder are kind of tough. You'll have to sand them out or use a razor blade as that milk paint binder really adheres well. So nice one. This is where the only time where it's required that you have a 100% coverage. No holidays here. So making sure you get into all the crevices, nice long strokes, watching out for those runs. And it doesn't look very dark right now, but as that milk paint starts to dry, it'll start to come to a nice cohesive color. And I could have went with a stain or an actual paint base, but I wanted something really authentic. So my choice for me was to use the Toscana Milk Paint with the binder. I want it to look as original as possible. Now you do have the option to do 2 coats, but I just actually did 1 coat here. So next we're going to work on applying our cracked gesso. We let the bench cure overnight, and I took out my cracked gesso the morning of, let it come to room temperature because I had it in the refrigerator. You don't want to store this stuff too long out in the elements, but I'm showing here some options for brushes. If you want a really smooth surface, you can use a blush brush or an artist brush, but here I'm also using just our regular chip brush to apply our cracked gesso in nice, smooth, even layers. On the carved pieces, I want a little bit thicker of a gesso where I want it to crack, where on the seat, I want it more smooth. Now, this is the next day. Our bench has dried overnight, And what we want to be mindful of are any drips or gobs of gesso that we can sand down, especially if it's in a really smooth area. We're going to use a 220 grit sandpaper and just gently bringing down any raised edges. But that gesso dries really beautiful. It dries a nice white. Even if it looks pink in your container, not to worry. It will dry white. But cracked gesso is where that magic happens. And really helps your piece look so authentic as we are working on this Swedish Rococo bench. So we're going to apply our first layer of milk paint. So mine has sat overnight, and obviously you can see it's pretty thick. So we're going to have to stir it up, or you can use your hand blender to get it going again. We're going to put it through a cheesecloth to eliminate some of that foam, because you don't want to paint with foam. Foam is going to have bubbles and foam in your finish, and we don't want that. So using a cheesecloth, you can strain out any of those the foam part of it before you start painting. You can also use your hand blender, let it sit, come back to it, and scoop off the foam. But I also like to use a cheesecloth. Sometimes I don't like the cheesecloth because it takes patience to strain, but it is working. So take off that cheesecloth, put it to the side. We're going to use our natural bristle chip brush. Amy carries these. They are excellent. I've had mine for many years, as you can tell. So we're going to unload our brush and offload and just go ahead and paint our first layer. After our first layer has dried, I usually wait about at least 5 hours, sometimes overnight. We're going to do a wax resist method. I'm going to use a clear wax puck. I'm going to use a natural bristle chip brush, and in places where that bench would have been touched, I'm going to add little touches of wax. That's going to prevent the next layer from adhering perfectly to that first layer of milk paint. Because when I start taking away layers, I want to reveal the colors down below. So adding a wax, it's called the wax resist method, in certain little areas, not all over your whole bench, but just little places on your pieces where you would love to see those colors really easily come through without really having to heavily distress your piece as well. So we're going to do that on this and on the next layer, and that's going to be that. So we're going to go ahead and now we're going to paint with our second layer, our darkest layer. Again, natural bristle chip brush, a clean brush. And we're going to go ahead and agitate the paint before we begin, because all those pigments have settled. We want to make sure we really stir that up. Also, what helps is working with a container where your brush isn't completely submerged too. So here I am applying my second coat, just like the first, getting in all the crevices. It's okay if there are holidays with this finish, because we're going to be pulling the paint off too. I do like to try to achieve a nice even coverage, but it's okay if you don't have 100% coverage. That's actually, it'll be nice when you start to pull and you get to the gesso, in some instances, quicker. But I just absolutely love that color. So once that second layer is dry, we're going to repeat the wax resist method again. Just adding in touches of where, again, I'd like to see that paint lift or not adhere.
And now we're gonna apply our third layer. Our third layer isn't the lightest, but it's not the darkest layer. I'm gonna make sure there's no foam. We're not painting with foam as we go ahead and apply that third layer of milk paint. You're gonna notice that your piece looks like it's getting thicker because each layer is starting to build. And your paint's gonna dry faster. So as you go, you're going to use more paint. So keep that in mind. I also urge you to make a little bit extra of that third layer, just in case you distress too much with that antiquing glaze. You can always come back and touch up with that third layer. Milk paint is really forgiving. I hope you guys really enjoy this. And just nice, easy, beautiful long coats. Perfect. Now the magic really starts to happen. We are going to use antiquing glaze. As you see, I have two bowls in front of me. One bowl, the red one, is full of water. My orange bowl has antiquing glaze. Before you begin antiquing, you need to submerge your seawool sponge so it's soft. Squeeze it out and then dunk it into that antiquing glaze. You're going to just hit drag all over your piece with that antiquing glaze. Dab, 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 not in a linear way. Otherwise it doesn't look organic. So we're hit dragging all over your piece, melting the layers together. And now you're gonna take a rag after that paint has started to get a little soft from the antiquing glaze and do a hit drag there too, where you can pull off some of the paint on the really beautiful carved areas. And you need to start thinking about, where was this bench touched? How was this bench used? How were people sitting on it? There were probably places that weren't very touched, but then there were some where, they probably sat in the middle, or they grabbed the railings, or they put their leg on the leg. So be mindful of what you're doing with this antiquing glaze. It's just, and we're not using sandpaper here. This is really a natural, and it creates such a smooth, really beautiful texture. If you can feel, when you're done, you're going to be just amazed. But you can take on or take off as much as you like. You can let that glaze sit on there for a few minutes and then come back and dab that off with that clean rag to take a little more paint off. Now be mindful that as your rag is a negative tool, you get more and more paint on it. Careful, because now that will become a positive tool, adding that color to places maybe you didn't really intend to. So, turning that rag or possibly using a new one as you lift the paint off your piece. So now we're going to, after that has dried, again, I like to let everything go overnight to dry. That way the next day I can start fresh. So here we're using Amy's size and an artist brush or a gilding brush to apply our size on the legs. And I'm doing it in small, little tasteful little spots. I'm testing for the tack. So that's testing to see how dry it's gotten. You want to be able to feel a little pull on your finger when it's come to tack. And when that's time, you can go ahead and apply your gold leaf. Now, gold leaf comes in these large squares, but I like to cut them in half. I feel like I have more control. So you're going to open your booklet and you see the sheets that come with it. You're going to use that to help burnish your gold leaf in places. Yeah, just like that. Now, typically I'd like to let my piece sit for a little bit before I go ahead and use my chip brush to take off the excess. But for sake of time, I'm going to actually burnish unusually quickly with a natural bristle chip brush, and we're going to take off the excess of where that size hadn't touched. Now make sure when you're applying that size that it has come to tack, because it will never dry otherwise. It will always be moving around. So make sure it comes to tack. And here I've already done my whole bench, so we are cruising along. We're going to apply some antiquing, some light antique wax here with a round bristled chip brush. I unloaded and now I offloaded the wax so it thoroughly goes through all the bristles. And so I'm not forcibly using a rag and applying it all over. It's just lightly kissing the bench to cover all that hard work we've just done and to protect our gold leaf. And as you see that where you start to add that antique wax, it starts to make that all those colors start to come alive, really pretty. You start to see that blue really come out. That light antique wax has an amber color to it, and it really brings out some of these gorgeous milk paints. So I'm just easily just applying, light brushing this wax throughout my bench, protecting the legs. And you'll know when it comes to dry, when it comes to tack. It won't feel like it's moving around the wax. We're gonna wait. Typically I'd wait an hour before I would buff it, but we're gonna do some dark wax. So we're actually only gonna wait about 20 minutes. Well, actually, we're gonna wait 40 minutes and then we'll add the dark wax. And so I'm gonna use a dark wax puck. I urge you to be very careful with this dark wax. You can take a beautiful project and make it look extremely dirty very easily. So you're going to use a natural bristle chip brush with your dark puck. You're going to onload with the natural bristle chip brush. Make sure you pull out all the bristles, and you don't want to use your nice hog hair brush because that will distribute way too much. And so a dark wax brush here, make sure you label it. Onload, we're going to offload all that wax. Make sure it's distributed evenly throughout the brush. And you want to start in an inconspicuous place, like on the feet or on the side, but not in the middle of your piece. So I'm going to start on the feet. And I want you to start thinking about, this is where someone had swept or mopped, and every time it got touched and dirtied again, these are the places where people's feet touched, or this is where dirt was kicked up onto it, or, over time, many years over time. So I'm just so lightly butterfly kissing these legs. And as you start to see, you can start to see a really beautiful depth come into the foot there. Also, so do a little bit, step back. Take about 3 to 5 feet back. Take a look at your piece. How is it looking? Take a look at older pieces and pieces that are part of history or on first dibs. This bench I was inspired by Tara Shaw, looking at her design books and following her on Instagram, pieces she collects. That's where I was inspired for this bench. And I studied pieces of where they were touched and how they were dirtied, or how, where they were distressed and over time worn. So that way you have an idea of what you're doing with this wax. It really can bring a piece to the next level, or it can completely destroy it. So caution with our dark wax. Now we're going to be adding dust of ages. So I can't let the waxes completely dry. You want to be careful because you don't want to create an additional layer of color. So before you, I wait about 20 minutes for that dark wax, and now I am ready to start adding dust of ages. And what I do to preventing a giant mess is I actually let that dust of ages, I let it sit overnight. So, you know, I know some people say an hour, but because I'm, especially when I have a light finish like this, I will let the wax harden up. I will let it hold on to that dust of ages, and then I'll remove it. So I'm going to apply the dust of ages with the 2.5 inch chip brush here. I'm going to onload, and now I'm going to tap on the sides to offload, because otherwise we end up with a ton. So as you see, I'm pouncing into all the crevices, into all the beautiful little, they're perfect. I love it. And I'm just gonna let that sit there, and I'm gonna let it harden up. Now, this is tough when you're working on a vertical piece, because as you apply that dust of ages, it's gonna drop. It can be done, but if it's not a carved piece, dust of ages is very difficult, especially on a vertical piece, to do. So if you can lay it down, but I get it if you can't. So I'm applying all over, pouncing. And so now the bench has dried. I've turned it upright the next day. As you see, I'm gonna wear a dust mask. This gets pretty dusty. If you have asthma, or if you have children of asthma, have them not be in the room, wear a dust mask. And we're going to use a lint-free rag, and we're gonna buff this piece now. So by buffing the piece, we are taking the dust of ages that didn't stick into the wax, it hasn't become a part of the finish, and buffing the dust of ages actually gives your piece another additional coat of finish. So here I am, I'm just buffing it off. It's gonna get really dusty. I warn you in advance. So just have a vacuum handy. So this is our final piece, and I just absolutely love the finish. How the dust is actually settled into the crevices, I just think that's absolutely beautiful. And sometimes if it's a little too much, you can come back and still buff that out. And I'm gonna let this again sit for an additional 24 hours and let it really, really harden up. But yeah, I just wanted to show you all the detail with this dust of ages, with that dark wax, the light wax, all the colors brought off with the antique. Okay, so we've added in our foam seat, or cushion seat. It's just come back from the upholsteress. We decided we're going to add a welt in the bottom here to even out that gap, but overall this bench looks amazing. It's in a Swedish Rococo style, and with beautiful gilding that you guys have learned. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, please, or comments, please leave them down below. I encourage you to try milk paint. At first it is a little tough, but the more you do it, the better you get.